Story 1. 2 weeks. That's all it took for everything to unravel. We'd moved to Black Hollow, a small town that promised peace, and it started like any typical story. We were hopeful, new beginnings, a new house, and a fresh start. But the moment we arrived, something felt wrong. We got to the house early in the morning, the fog thick and swallowing the land. It was still drizzling lightly as we pulled up, and there, standing in the rain, was a boy. His shoulders were shaking, his sobs muffled by the constant rain. And beside him, there was a woman. I couldn't see her face clearly, but the feeling in my chest tightened. Claire, my wife, stepped out first, concern in her voice. "Are you all right?" she asked the boy, her voice soft, trying to offer him comfort. The boy didn't answer, but simply nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his sleeve. Then, without a word, he turned and started walking away. His steps were heavy, like he was dragging something with him. He stopped halfway down the street and turned back, locking eyes with us for a brief moment. His face twisted in a strange way, not from sadness but from something darker. He shook his head, the motion slow, deliberate. Like he knew something we didn't. Something terrible. Claire took a step forward. "Hey! Are you sure you're okay?" she called, but the boy didn't respond. The woman, who had been standing quietly by, finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost like a whisper in the rain. "He's crying for you." My blood froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion and unease bubbling in my stomach. The woman didn't blink. "He's an omen. I saw him cry like that before my son went missing. They only found pieces of him, his hands, his legs. But nothing more. The earth takes what it wants, and when it does, it doesn't stop." Claire stepped back, her voice shaking. "What are you talking about? Are you a neighbor?" The woman's eyes narrowed, as if she saw through Claire's feigned calm. "I don't live here," she muttered, her lips curling into a grin that didn't belong on a human face. "I just follow the boy. He warns them, but they never listen. Not one of them ever listens." I glanced at Claire, my mind already working overtime, trying to find an explanation. "She's just crazy, Claire. People in small towns get like this," I said, but even as I said it, my skin crawled. The woman was unfazed. "Young, arrogant, thinking you can outrun fate." She turned to walk away, her back hunched with age, yet her words lingered in the air like the rain. "But mark my words. This land, it knows nothing but tragedy. It was built on the blood of the innocent, and it will take its due, in time." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was already gone, vanishing into the mist like a phantom. "What the hell was that about?" I muttered, my voice barely more than a whisper. Claire didn't answer immediately. Her gaze followed the path the woman had taken, the unease settling in her eyes. "She's just trying to scare us, that's all. But, still. I don't know, something about it doesn't feel right." I shook my head, trying to shake off the cold grip on my chest. "No, I don't think that's it. Something's wrong with this place. I don't know what, but it's wrong." The rest of the day passed in a blur of half-hearted attempts to unpack, to settle in. But no matter how much I tried to focus on our new life, my mind couldn't stop returning to that woman's words. The earth takes what it wants. As the night drew in, the house grew still, too still. The kind of silence that presses on your ears, fills the air with a heavy weight. I was sitting in the living room, drinking a beer, trying to ignore the tightening feeling in my chest. Claire had put Liam to bed and gone to sleep herself. I was about to doze off when I heard it. Thump. I froze, sitting up straight. My breath caught in my throat. It was faint at first, but it was there. Thump. Like something wet was dragging across the floor. Thump. It was closer this time. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The sound wasn't from the house settling. It was something else. Thump. Thump. The noise seemed to come from the hallway, but where? Where was it coming from? I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it. It was wet, almost alive. I forced myself to sit still, my whole body tensed, waiting for the next sound. But nothing came. I should have gotten up, gone to check. But I stayed there, staring at the shadows, telling myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining it. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't imagination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I fell asleep. But the unease didn't leave. The next day, we saw the boy again. This time, he wasn't crying. He was standing at the end of our street, staring at our house, his eyes wide and unblinking. It felt like he was waiting for something. But for what? Why is he always here? Claire asked, her voice tight. He's been here every day we've been here. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. Then, behind him, the old woman appeared again, like a shadow from the past. She looked at us with those knowing eyes, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't friendly. It's begun, she said softly. The earth has cried enough tears, and now it's your turn. What does that mean? Claire demanded, taking a step forward. What do you want from us? The woman's face softened, but only in the cruelest way. I can't help you. It's already chosen you. It always chooses. What do you mean? I asked, trying to mask the fear in my voice. We're just here to live. We don't want trouble. She looked at us, her gaze piercing, like she could see through our souls. You don't understand. The earth remembers. It never forgets. And it will take what it wants, from you, from your son. It will make you feel it. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. I glanced at Claire, but her face was pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. Let's just go inside, I said, turning away. I can't take this anymore. But the woman's voice stopped me. Remember my warning, she called out softly. Before it's too late. I didn't respond. Instead, I hurried Claire inside, locking the door behind us. But that night, the noises returned. Thump. Closer. So much closer. Claire, wide-eyed, gripped my arm. Do you hear that? She whispered. It's back. It's here. I tried to reassure her, but the words didn't come out right. They felt wrong. I stood up slowly, as if my body knew before my mind did. I had to face whatever was making that noise. Whatever it was, I couldn't stay in the dark anymore. I opened the door to the hallway. It was too quiet. I stepped forward, and the wet dragging sound intensified. I turned the corner to the living room, and then I saw it. A figure. It was crouched in the corner, its skin pale and stretched tight over bone. Its eyes were empty, hollow, like the dark void of space. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking despite myself. It didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head at me, its lipless grin widening until it was almost grotesque. The sound of its breathing filled the room, wet and labored. And then, it spoke in a voice that wasn't its own. You're the one who doesn't belong. You're the one who will pay. Suddenly, I understood. The land, the earth, wasn't just angry. It was hunting us. Every word that woman said was true. Every piece of history, every drop of blood that had soaked into the ground, it had awakened something. Something ancient. Something hungry. And as I reached out to Claire, the room plunged into darkness, and the sound of thumping grew louder, drawing closer. Story 2. The door creaked behind me as I stepped further into the shop, the cold air biting at my skin like the fingers of unseen hands. The woman in black glided across the room, her movements so smooth they seemed unnatural. She didn't look at me directly, but I could feel her eyes, sharp and knowing, weighing every inch of my being. She stopped in front of an old wooden cabinet, her fingers brushing over the glass case as if caressing something far more delicate than the objects it contained. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," she murmured, almost as if speaking to herself. "It can lead you to wonders, yes, but also to things better left untouched." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat had gone dry, and my heartbeat sounded unnaturally loud in my ears. "Do you know what you've walked into?" she continued, turning to face me with an unsettling smile. Her green eyes gleamed in the low light, as if something ancient and terrible stirred within them. I didn't mean to," I stammered, the words feeling strange on my tongue. I saw the shop, and You felt the pull," she interrupted, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "It wasn't just chance that brought you here. You were chosen." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "Chosen for what?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. "To wish," she said softly, like a secret. She stepped closer, her scent, a strange mix of dust, incense, and something metallic, filled my nostrils. "Everyone who enters this place has a wish. But remember, every wish, there is always a cost." My heart raced as I looked at her, the shadows in the room growing longer and deeper. "What cost?" Her smile deepened, and she leaned in so close that I could feel the cold of her breath on my skin. "A price paid in ways you cannot imagine. It is a price that always finds you." I shook my head, taking a small step back. "I don't want anything. I don't want to wish for anything. She raised a finger to her lips, silencing me. "The price isn't for you to decide. But the wish," she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The wish is yours to make." Suddenly, she turned, walking slowly to a dusty shelf in the far corner. I followed her, my feet moving without thought. On the shelf sat an object, glowing faintly in the dim light, a snow globe. It was smaller than I expected, delicate, but undeniably strange. Inside, a tiny village lay covered in white snow, a church at its center, and two crosses near the edge, half buried beneath the snow. She reached for it with a slow, deliberate motion, turning it over in her hands before holding it out to me. This is your key," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words slithering into my mind. I took the globe from her, feeling its weight. It was heavier than I expected, its glass cool to the touch. As I gazed into it, something felt off, a strange vibration, as if the village inside was alive. I could almost hear the distant toll of a bell, the rustling of snow. "Shake it," she urged, her eyes locked onto mine with a fierce intensity. "And wish. Make your wish, and see what the world gives you." "Wait," I said, feeling a cold sweat on my palms. "What happens if I do? What's going to happen?" The woman smiled again, but this time, there was something more sinister in her expression. "You'll see soon enough. But remember, once you wish, there's no turning back. Time will begin to move in ways you cannot predict." I began, but my voice trailed off. I could feel it, the pull. A temptation I couldn't resist. The globe seemed to whisper to me, beckoning. The snow inside swirled, as if calling for me to make my choice. I raised it in my hands, shaking it gently. The snowflakes inside twirled and danced like tiny spirits, but then, something changed. The white snow began to darken, each flake slowly turning black, swirling together in a dark, mesmerizing pattern. "What's happening?" I whispered, feeling my breath catch in my throat. The woman's eyes glowed brighter, her smile widening. "It's already begun," she said softly, her voice both soothing and terrifying. Your wish has been made. Now, it's only a matter of time. A deep chill washed over me as I stared into the globe, unable to look away. The tiny village within had shifted. The once peaceful scene was now filled with shadow. The church loomed over the tiny figures frozen in the snow, the crosses growing darker, deeper. What did I do? I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a strange presence behind me, as if something had just entered the room, something that wasn't human. The woman stepped closer, her breath cold against my ear. You wished for change, didn't you? But change always comes with a cost. You will pay for it, in time. I spun around, desperate, but she was gone. The shop around me felt emptier, darker, as if the very walls were closing in. The air was thick with something ancient, something that had been waiting for me. I ran for the door, my heart racing, but as I reached for the handle, the room seemed to twist. The door wouldn't open. Please, let me out, I begged, panic rising in my chest. I looked back over my shoulder, half expecting the woman to appear again, but there was nothing. The shop was silent, save for the soft sound of the snow inside the globe, still swirling. From behind me, I heard her voice once more, low and mocking. It's too late. You'll never leave. Not until the price is paid. I turned around, my vision blurring with fear, but she was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the globe sat there, glowing faintly in the darkness. And in that moment, I understood. I had made my choice. And now, I would have to live with it. Story 3. It had been days, or maybe weeks, I couldn't tell anymore. Time seemed like an old memory, lost in the weight of what was happening. The bright, pulsing vines were spreading through our world, tearing apart everything in their path. My legs hurt from the constant scrambling, my body swollen and weak, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until I understood. I had been alone for some time. My mother hadn't stirred since I last found her, lying still beneath a heap of vines. My sisters, the ones I used to play with, had all gone missing, swallowed up by the bright. It was always the same, the hunger gnawed at me, driving me into the damp, twisting tunnels below. I had learned to eat, to feed on the things that grew, bitter as they were, to stop the burning in my belly. You can't stay down here forever, a voice hissed in the darkness. I froze. My antennae twitched, senses alert. The voice wasn't mine. It was deep, rasping, as though the air itself was speaking. I looked up, but there was no one. I'll make you go to the bright, the voice whispered again, louder this time. A cold chill ran down my spine. I turned and crawled deeper into the wet, hoping it would silence the voice. But it only grew louder. You can never escape it, can you? The bright is all there is now. I pulled myself along the rocky path, my body heavy, my joints aching. My eyes stung from the brightness in the air, the light seeping through the cracks in the walls. I tried to ignore the sense of dread creeping in, the fear gnawing at my insides. But the vines were everywhere. Mother! I cried out, desperate. She hadn't moved. Her body was a thin, broken shell, and I had no idea how to fix her. I tried. I tried to push her parts back together, but nothing stayed. The voice inside my head chuckled darkly. She won't wake up. She belongs to the bright now. No, I whispered, my heart pounding. She can't be gone. She can't. I turned away from her and crawled up the tunnel, desperate to find my sisters. If I could find them, if I could just find someone, maybe the bright wouldn't take me too. But as I reached the top, I saw them, my sisters, their bodies twisted and thin, their eyes blank, lifeless. Help me! I shouted, but they didn't respond. Their skin was turning pale, veins like dark rivers beneath their flesh, pulsing with the same sickly light that had consumed everything else. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why won't you come back? Their bodies remained still. I moved closer, my heart pounding. Then I heard it, another voice, low and guttural, coming from deep within the shadows. They are beyond help, the voice rasped, just like you will be. I whipped around, fear creeping into my spine. I was alone, wasn't I? But no, there, standing at the edge of the tunnel, was a figure. Its face was obscured by the twisted vines, but I could feel its gaze, cold and knowing. What are you? I whispered, my voice barely a breath. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring my fear. You don't remember me, do you? It asked, its voice laced with something darker, something ancient. No, I stammered, trembling. Who are you? The figure chuckled softly. I am what the bright leaves behind. It raised its hand, and the vines around it pulsed. They seemed to writhe, as if alive. A horrible, shrill sound echoed from them, a sound like countless whispers intertwined, all speaking at once. Why are you here? I choked out, backing away, feeling my legs tremble beneath me. You've been feeding, haven't you? The voice's tone was mocking, yet there was something deeper in it, a warning. Feeding on the growths, on the vines. You're just like the rest of them. I'm not like them. I shouted, but doubt crept into my mind. I had been feeding on them, hadn't I? The pain in my belly, the hunger that never ceased, it was their fault. But even now, as I spoke, I felt the familiar burning, that terrible ache deep inside, urging me to eat, to consume. Of course, you are. They all feed. They feed until there's nothing left. The figure moved closer, its voice rising in intensity. But there's always more. And soon, there will be nothing but the bright. The ground beneath me trembled, and I stumbled, falling back into the wet. The vines seemed to grow thicker, thicker than before, wrapping around everything, pulling me in. I couldn't breathe. The brightness was overwhelming, suffocating. Help me. I cried, reaching out, but the figure just stood there, watching, its eyes glowing like cold embers. It's too late for help, the figure whispered. It's too late for all of us. Suddenly, the tunnel above us cracked, and a loud, crushing noise filled the air. A massive stone fell, blocking the exit. The figure tilted its head, watching the rubble with a strange, almost curious gaze. Ah, it said softly. They've found us. I froze, listening. A sound, distant at first, grew louder, a loud, scraping, clattering noise. It was coming from above, from where the creatures with the shells and claws had appeared before. They were coming. No, no. I gasped, scrambling to my feet. I need to get out of here. The figure didn't move. Instead, it reached out, its hand brushing against the vines. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. They are already here, it said, a strange calm in its voice. The two legs, the ones who are not like us. I turned and ran, my body screaming with the effort, but the walls of the tunnel seemed to close in on me. The vines were everywhere, growing faster now, writhing and snapping at my heels. Stop running, the figure called after me, its voice now distant. You cannot escape it. None of us can. I ignored it. I had to keep going, keep fighting. But then, I heard it. A voice, faint at first, calling from behind me. Mother. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was my sister's voice, my sister's voice. I turned around, breathless. Lyra? I called. Lyra, is that you? From the shadows, her form emerged, but it wasn't her, not really. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her body twisted unnaturally thin. Her eyes were wide, hollow, glazed over. She was alive, but not truly. "Help me," she whispered, her voice rasping, "please, help me." I stepped forward, reaching out. "Lyra, what's happening to you? Why are you?" She stepped closer, her limbs jerking unnaturally, her mouth opening in a grotesque grin. "You can't help me. You can't help any of us." Her voice, once familiar, was now full of an alien malice, and before I could react, her hand shot out, gripping my arm with a force that felt like cold, iron claws. "I should have never left," she whispered, her breath cold against my ear. "We should have stayed with Mother. The bright, it never stops. It never leaves." The ground beneath us trembled again, and the walls of the tunnel cracked as the figures, those monstrous two-legged creatures, emerged from the rubble above. Their eyes gleamed, and their twisted forms cast monstrous shadows across the floor. I could feel the vines closing in, could feel the bright burning me from the inside. My sister's grip tightened, her face contorting into something horrifying. "No!" I screamed, trying to pull away. "I won't become like you." But her voice, cold and unfeeling, echoed in my mind. "It's too late for that." And then everything went black. Story 4. In the dim glow of the porch lamp, the door stood silent, bathed in pale yellow light. The wood was chipped, peeling in places, as though it had been subjected to countless years of harsh weather. Above the door, the number 31 was barely visible, etched into the frame. A dusty glass lantern hung nearby, casting a weak, flickering glow. A single moth danced desperately around the glass, its frenzied fluttering a reminder of something trapped. I stood frozen, watching the moth's fruitless attempts to reach the light. Its wings blurred with frantic motion, striking the glass again and again. My eyes shifted downwards, drawn to the blackness beyond the porch. The night stretched on endlessly, a thick, impenetrable darkness. There were no sounds, no cars, no distant hum of life, only the unyielding quiet. The porch, vast and empty except for an old wooden rocking chair, seemed to breathe with a quiet energy of its own. The house loomed, ancient and uninviting, the air heavy with stillness. I shivered, but it wasn't from the cold. Something wasn't right. After a moment, I knocked, my knuckles tapping softly on the door. Time stretched, and I felt as though I had waited for an eternity. I raised my hand to knock again, but the sound of footsteps echoed from inside. The door creaked open, revealing a figure. An old man stood before me. He wore a black suit that was old-fashioned, like something out of a forgotten era. His face was gaunt, pale, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "Come in," he rasped, his voice thick with a strange accent. His gaze flicked to the moth, still tapping away at the glass, and then back to me. I hesitated, unsure, but something compelled me forward. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I found myself in a dimly lit hallway. The old man shuffled off without a word, leaving me alone. The air in the house was heavy, suffocating, yet strangely warm. The hallway stretched far ahead, the walls adorned with portraits of people I didn't recognize, their eyes seemingly following me as I moved. At the end of the hall, a grand staircase led to the upper floor, but my attention was caught by a door ajar to the left. Hesitantly, I stepped inside. The room was filled with strange, antique furniture. A fireplace crackled to life, the fire casting eerie shadows across the room. A grandfather clock stood against the far wall, its face cracked and covered in dust. But it was the strange symbols and overlapping gears that caught my attention, the hands of the clock moving erratically, each spinning in different directions, as if mocking the very concept of time. A figure appeared in the doorway. A woman. She was beautiful, unnervingly so. She wore a black dress that shimmered in the firelight, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes were a deep, unblinking black, and her skin was impossibly pale. She smiled faintly. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge of something I couldn't quite place. "You must be tired. Please, have a seat." I was frozen, my mind struggling to grasp what was happening. I wanted to ask how I had gotten here, what this place was, but the questions caught in my throat. The woman didn't wait for my response. She gestured to an ornate chair, and as if under a spell, I moved to sit. Suddenly, the old man appeared again, holding a crystal flute of champagne. He handed it to me without a word, and I took it automatically, my hand trembling as I raised it to my lips. The liquid inside was golden, sparkling with an otherworldly gleam. I drank, and the taste was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a deep, rich flavor that seemed to linger in the back of my throat. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice laced with an unspoken meaning. I don't understand," I murmured. "Where am I?" The woman's smile deepened, as if she had been waiting for the question. "You're here, in the Hall of Whispers. And you are just on time." She tilted her head, her gaze sharpening. "For what, you ask?" "For the truth, of course." A chill ran down my spine. "The truth about what?" I stammered. Before she could answer, the old man appeared once more, his presence as silent as ever. He motioned for me to follow him. I glanced at the woman, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Hesitating, I followed him down the hallway, each step echoing eerily through the silence. The house was vast, labyrinthine, with countless rooms, each filled with strange relics from another age. We passed through dining rooms, bedrooms, all filled with old and modern items in strange disarray. The old man moved with a speed and grace that didn't match his age, his steps swift and quiet, as if he knew the house too well. Finally, we arrived at a door at the end of yet another hallway. The man opened it, revealing a small room, simple yet strangely unsettling. A bed, a vanity, a rug, but no sign of life. It was as if the room had never been used, but the air felt thick with something unsaid. "You'll be comfortable here," the old man said in a low voice before turning and leaving without a word. I stood frozen, a strange unease crawling over me. My eyes flickered around the room, but my thoughts were clouded with confusion. This wasn't right. This place, this house. I had to leave. I spun toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, a soft, familiar voice stopped me. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice almost sing-song. The woman stood in the doorway, her eyes dark and endless. "I need to leave," I managed, my voice trembling. She laughed softly, almost pityingly. "Leave? You can't. You've already come so far." Her smile widened. "You've been here for much longer than you realize." I tried to speak, but my words failed me. My mind raced. How had I gotten here? What was this place? And why couldn't I remember anything before I knocked on the door? She stepped closer, her cold hand brushing my cheek. "You've been here since the accident," she murmured. "You just didn't know it." Suddenly, a flood of memories hit me, a flash of bright headlights, the screech of tires, the sharp turn. My car had crashed. I was supposed to be dead. But I wasn't. Not really. The room around me began to distort, the walls twisting, the floor shifting. The house was alive, its very structure seemed to breathe, pulse with a life of its own. "You're dead," she whispered, her voice echoing in the dark. "But you'll never leave here." The door slammed shut behind me, and the house seemed to close in. I ran, desperate, down corridors that stretched endlessly, but every turn led me back to the same room. The hallway felt infinite. And then, through the thick fog of despair, I realized. I had been here before. The door. The moth. The endless hallway. I had been trapped all along. And I would never leave. The end. Story 5. The towering structure of the bleak hotel loomed in front of me like a monolith, an unsettling place that seemed to distort its very surroundings. The facade was weathered, the windows grimy, but the invitation to stay was irresistible. The vast, empty halls of the hotel stretched up into the dark sky, and a lingering sense of something watching me kept my senses alert. There was something off about this place. I had been sent here by a new job, one I hadn't fully grasped at first. They told me it was a marketing gig at an undisclosed company called Vox Ion, focusing on obscure places with hidden, often twisted histories. I'd been a journalist, a wanderer, and I knew how to ask the right questions. When I was told this assignment would involve investigating the bleak hotel, I had no idea what I was really stepping into. Walking through the entrance, the weight of the hotel's oppressive silence smothered me. The lobby stretched far beyond what was visible, vanishing into shadowed corridors. There was no reception desk at first glance, only a dim light that flickered eerily overhead. I wandered toward it, only to be greeted by a woman who appeared out of nowhere. Her name was Evelyn, and she had an unnerving calmness in her voice. "Mr. Stone, we've been expecting you," she said, her pale eyes not leaving mine as she handed me a room key. "You're here to explore, aren't you? We're so glad to have someone who knows how to handle the dark." I gave her a confused look, unsure whether I'd heard her correctly. "I didn't expect everyone to know who I am," I replied, a chill running down my spine. Evelyn smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. "It's our little secret. The hotel has its stories. You'll hear them soon enough." With my room key in hand, I made my way to the elevator. The old contraption groaned as it ascended. The floors were empty, desolate, and the air was thick with something I couldn't quite place, perhaps the ghosts of the past, maybe something worse. My room was on the 13th floor, a stark contrast to the luxurious hotels I was accustomed to. The walls were cracked, the bed sagged in the middle, and the air felt stale as though it had not been disturbed for years. I sighed and let myself relax on the bed, but something kept tugging at my nerves. The atmosphere felt wrong, but I ignored it and headed out to the casino to kill time. The place was busy, yet there was an eerie quiet that hung over it, as if the people were all too absorbed in their games to notice their surroundings. I wandered through, the slot machines flashing their hypnotic lights, but a faint sound caught my attention, the sound of whispers. I turned a corner to find the staff standing motionless, staring at me. Their eyes seemed empty, lifeless, and yet they followed my every movement. I quickly averted my gaze, uneasy with the whole scene, and left the casino. It wasn't until later that night that I noticed something strange, a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was too dark to make out the details, but the faint outline was unmistakable. A woman. She was dressed in tattered clothing, and her body seemed to sway, unnaturally. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The air around me grew colder, and the shadowy figure slowly approached, her footfalls echoing in the silence. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, "Not all guests leave, some stay, forever." I was frozen in place. Before I could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving only the smell of decay behind her. My heart raced as I backed into my room, slamming the door behind me. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. Something wasn't right. I couldn't sleep that night, the shadows in my room shifting and changing, almost as if they were alive. My restless mind began to spiral, questioning everything. Why had I been chosen for this assignment? Why had the hotel felt so wrong? Suddenly, the door to my room creaked open. I rushed to it, but no one was there. A whisper reached my ear, and I spun around. The maid, the same woman from earlier, stood in the corner, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face was a mask of calmness, but her eyes held a strange gleam. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice cold and distant. "Seen what?" I replied, dread creeping into my voice. "The truth," she whispered. "The hotel is alive. It doesn't just house its guests, it consumes them." Before I could react, her eyes darkened, and she slowly stepped back into the shadows. "It's too late for you now," she said, her words cutting through the silence. I stumbled back, my breath shallow. What was she talking about? I had to leave. I had to get out. But when I reached the elevator, the doors wouldn't open. The entire building seemed to groan, as if awakening from a long slumber. I turned, desperate, and saw the woman again, standing at the end of the hall, her smile twisted and knowing. "There is no escape from the bleak hotel," she said. I ran. I bolted down the stairs, my feet pounding the old stone steps. The further I went, the more the walls closed in. Every turn, every door was locked. It was as if the hotel had become a labyrinth, designed to trap me inside. Finally, I reached the main lobby, only to find it was no longer the place I had entered. The walls were cracked, bleeding, and the air reeked of death. The receptionist was no longer human. Her body was twisted, her face pale and contorted into a grotesque smile. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light as she spoke. "You were always meant to stay here, Mr. Stone. The hotel doesn't let go of its guests. Welcome to your new home." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The hotel had already claimed me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the eyes of Evelyn, staring at me from the shadows. Story 6. I have always been obsessed with watching the darkest secrets of others unravel on TV. There's something about the way people expose their deepest lies, their hidden betrayals, their unspeakable crimes that stirs something deep within me. It's like a twisted rush, a craving for something real, unscripted, and dangerous. But lately, I've grown tired of the usual. All those confessions on daytime talk shows have begun to feel stale. The cheating spouses, the estranged children, the victims, and the villains, they all blend together into a monotonous blur. I want something more. I want fear. Real, raw fear. There's a new show I've found, something different, something darker. It's called The Confession Chamber. The name alone sends a chill down my spine. The host is a woman named Veronica Thorne, her icy smile as unsettling as the shadows that flicker behind her. The camera zooms in on her, and she speaks in a tone that is too calm, too rehearsed, almost as if she's daring you to question her every word. Tonight, she announces with that bone-chilling smile, we reveal the truths that no one dares speak aloud. Welcome, to the confession chamber. The lights dim, and the set is almost suffocating in its silence. The only sound is the low hum of something mechanical. The guests sit in a large, imposing chair, something between a dentist's torture device and a medieval electric chair. It's made of dark mahogany, and the metal parts glint under the harsh lights. There's a strange energy to it, like it hums with anticipation. I lean forward, eyes glued to the screen. The first guest, a man named Michael, steps forward, looking disoriented as he's strapped into the chair. His eyes dart around nervously, and his skin is slick with sweat. Veronica walks up to him, her heels clicking on the floor like the countdown to something inevitable. You've been running from the truth for a long time, haven't you, Michael? Veronica's voice is soothing, too soothing for the gravity of the moment. He doesn't answer. Instead, he shakes his head, his jaw clenched. His breath comes in short, frantic gasps. Tell us about the night you killed your sister. I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. The audience gasps, and Michael's face contorts in terror. I sit up straighter, my heart hammering in my chest. This isn't scripted. This is real. I didn't mean to, Michael chokes out, his voice breaking. She was in the way. I didn't know what I was doing. The chair whirs to life, and the screen flickers with static. The lights intensify. Michael's face pales as the machine starts, the metal parts around his body tightening. You're lying, Michael, Veronica says, her voice now an eerie whisper, barely audible over the electric hum. "And now, you'll confess everything. All of it." The audience watches in silence as Michael's breath becomes erratic, his hands trembling. His voice trembles as he begins to speak, telling the tale of a family unraveling from within. He reveals a childhood filled with cruelty and resentment, with his sister always a constant target. But the more he speaks, the more the machine seems to tighten, the hum growing louder, like a storm on the horizon. "I never wanted it to go this far," he whispers. "I never wanted her dead. But, she knew too much. She threatened to tell everyone. I couldn't let her ruin me." The chair's gears screech as it shifts again, sending a jolt through Michael's body. His back arches as if something invisible is pulling at him. His skin is slick with sweat, and his pupils are wide with terror. The hum grows louder, louder. The room is suddenly thick with tension. I can almost feel the electricity in the air, buzzing around me. My stomach churns as the intensity builds. Veronica leans in closer, her voice soft but firm. "Michael, tell them who else you've wronged. Tell them about your darkest secret, the one you've hidden for so long." Michael's eyes dart around the room, his lips trembling. Sweat drips down his face as the truth claws its way out of him. I had an affair. I betrayed her, my wife, with her best friend. I lied, again and again, until I couldn't tell what was real anymore." His voice cracks. But it doesn't stop there. I tried to burn the house down. After she found out." There's a sharp gasp from the audience. The electric hum intensifies. Michael's body twitches as the straps seem to tighten on his chest. His eyes are wild now, as if he's lost all control. "You tried to kill your own wife, Michael?" Veronica's voice is cold, calculating. "I didn't, no, I didn't mean to hurt her," Michael cries, "but it's too late." The chair jerks violently as the metal cap above his head glows ominously. "Enough," Veronica interrupts, her voice now steely. "You've revealed enough. But now, let the truth come for you." She raises a hand, and the chair starts to move again. Slowly, the lights dim, and an eerie sound fills the air, a low, rumbling hum that seems to vibrate the room itself. Michael's body starts to jerk, his mouth opening and closing like he's trying to scream but can't. He thrashes, his face contorted in terror as the chair pulses with electric energy. Suddenly, there's a deafening crack, and Michael's body goes still. The lights flicker. And then, total silence. The camera cuts away from the empty chair. I blink, my heart racing. Was it a trick? A special effect? But then, I see it. There's a flash on the screen, a brief image of Michael, his face twisted in agony, his eyes wide with terror. The screen blurs, and then, nothing. The camera cuts to Veronica, who is smiling, but there's no warmth in her expression now. Her smile is chilling, knowing. "Some confessions come at a price," she says softly, her voice a whisper in the static. "And some truths are better left buried." The screen goes black. I sit in stunned silence, unable to move, unable to process what I just saw. But then, as the credits roll, I hear a whisper. Just above the static, faint but unmistakable. "It's coming from the TV. I'll be waiting for you." I freeze. Was it Veronica's voice? Or, was it Michael's? Story 7. It was the middle of December, the first winter after my freshman year at college, and I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like a cold, wet blanket. My relationship had ended just a week before, and the betrayal still stung deep. I tried to stay upbeat for the holidays, forcing smiles at family dinners and pretending that everything was fine. But it was clear to everyone, especially to me, that I was not in the holiday spirit. By the time Christmas was over, I was beyond relieved to return to my dorm, away from the festive charades. A few days before New Year's Eve, I was holed up in my room when a loud knock startled me from my thoughts. "Go away!" I yelled, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. The knocking persisted, louder this time, until I couldn't ignore it any longer. Reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed and opened the door. There stood Emily, my roommate and best friend, her face beaming with excitement. "You look like a ghost," she commented, her eyes flicking over my disheveled appearance. I groaned, plopping back onto my bed. Emily launched into a pep talk about how I needed to get back on the horse and forget about my ex. She insisted that going to a huge New Year's Eve party off campus was the best way to take my mind off things. The idea sounded absurd, but after much pestering, I begrudgingly agreed. That evening, Emily showed up at my door with bags of makeup and a new dress she had picked out for me. She styled my hair, painted my face, and dressed me in a glittery black dress. I barely recognized myself. By the time we arrived at the house, the party was in full swing. The place was an old mansion just off campus, rented by a group of seniors who had far too much money. The moment we stepped inside, the sounds of music and laughter hit me like a wave. Emily dragged me through the crowded rooms, weaving through people until we reached the kitchen, where the drinks were. "Relax and have fun," Emily urged, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. I didn't want to be there, but I wasn't about to spoil Emily's night. I took a sip of my drink, scanning the room and trying to ignore the tension knotting in my stomach. Soon enough, I excused myself to use the bathroom. The downstairs bathroom was occupied, so I was directed by a guy standing by to try the bathroom upstairs. I hesitated but decided it was better than waiting. As I ascended the staircase, I noticed how eerily quiet the upper floors were. The noise from the party below was muffled, and there was a strange, almost unnatural stillness in the air. The hallway was lined with old, dusty photographs. Black and white portraits of people staring at the camera with lifeless expressions. None of them smiled. My skin crawled as I glanced at them, then quickly looked away. The hallway was narrow, leading to what seemed like a few bedrooms and a locked door at the end. Curious, I tried the door, expecting a bathroom, but instead, it led to another staircase, steep and dark. I climbed the stairs, feeling a growing sense of dread in my chest. The air grew colder the higher I went. When I reached the top, I was met with a room full of old boxes, holiday decorations, and suitcases. It was more like an attic than anything else. Sighing, I turned back to the stairs, planning to head back down. But as I jiggled the door handle, I realized it was locked. Panic began to creep in. I banged on the door and called out for help, but the loud music below drowned out any chance of being heard. I fumbled in my pocket, only to remember my phone was still downstairs with Emily. Trapped. Alone. And somehow, the darkness around me seemed to grow heavier, thicker. That's when I heard it. A soft voice from behind me, smooth and calm. "Do you need help?" I spun around in surprise. A man stood there, about my age, dressed in an old-fashioned button-down shirt and trousers. His appearance struck me as odd for the setting, but what really unsettled me was the way he was just standing there, as though he had materialized out of nowhere. "How did you?" My words trailed off, my throat dry. The boy smiled softly, a strange glint in his eyes. "I was just using the bathroom," he explained, pointing to a door nearby, half hidden behind an old, dusty cabinet. I blinked, confused. But I didn't see that door. Most people don't. His voice was oddly soothing, yet somehow chilling. I nodded, trying to laugh off my unease, and excused myself to use the bathroom. When I returned, the boy was still there, sitting on the dusty floor, flipping through old newspapers as if nothing were out of the ordinary. I didn't catch your name," I asked, trying to break the strange tension in the air. "Benjamin," he said simply, his gaze never leaving the paper. "Ben, right?" I asked, not sure why I felt the need to make it more casual. He shook his head. "No, it's Benjamin." His voice held a finality to it that made me hesitate. I was still unnerved by his strange presence, but I reminded myself I needed to leave. "We're locked in," I said, my voice tight. "I don't think we can get out." Benjamin didn't seem worried in the slightest. "No worries," he said, continuing to flip through the papers. "We'll figure it out." To my surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old-fashioned, ornate silver key. He tossed it to me casually. "Here. That should work," he said, without looking up. I stared at the key in my hand, perplexed. Where had he found this? But I didn't have time to ask. I was eager to leave. I rushed to the door and, to my relief, the key fit. "Are you coming?" I asked, looking back at Benjamin. He smiled, but this time, it seemed more distant. "Not yet. You go ahead." I didn't question him further. I unlocked the door and stepped out, but as I was about to make my way down the hallway, I paused. One of the photographs on the wall caught my eye. It was a picture of a boy, sitting on the floor with a dog, wearing a button-down shirt. He looked exactly like Benjamin. I froze. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the photograph. It was him. The same boy who had been sitting in the attic with me. My heart raced as I turned and fled, running back down the hallway and through the house, desperate to find Emily. "Hey! Wait!" Emily's voice cut through my panic. She was standing near the front door, looking worried. "Where have you been? We've been searching everywhere for you." I don't feel well," I stammered. "I'm going home." Without waiting for her reply, I rushed outside, hailing an Uber. My heart pounded as I climbed into the back seat, not daring to look at my phone until I was safely back in my dorm. I didn't tell Emily. She would never believe me. No one would. But the truth is, I met a ghost that night. And I can still hear Benjamin's voice echoing in my mind, soft and calm, as though he's still waiting for me in that dark attic. Story 8. It was the week before Christmas of my first year in college when my grandparents asked me for a favor. They were heading to Switzerland to visit my aunt, whom they hadn't seen in years. They had 2 dogs in a house on the edge of town, a house they didn't want to leave abandoned for a week. So, they offered to pay me to house sit for them. With no plans and a desire to make a little extra money, I agreed. Their house, an old Victorian, was built in the 1920s, and though it was beautifully kept, there was always something about it that felt off. The creaky floors, the thick curtains that never seemed to let in enough light, it all gave off a certain vibe. But I was used to it. I'd spent a lot of time there growing up. On the first night alone, I double-checked all the windows and doors before I went to bed. I wasn't scared, but the house had a way of making me uneasy. Everything was quiet, too quiet. After turning off the lights, I snuggled under the covers, hoping the peaceful night would keep my mind from wandering. At around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound. It was faint at first, like something scratching at the door. My heart raced. I lay still, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor downstairs. It wasn't the wind or the house settling, it was unmistakable. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed my mom. But before I could press the call button, the footsteps stopped. There was an eerie silence for what felt like an eternity. I crept out of bed and opened my bedroom door just a crack, peering into the dark hallway. The house felt colder, the air heavy. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight and slowly descended the stairs. The smell of something sweet lingered in the air, like roses. It didn't make sense. My grandparents didn't use that kind of perfume. They didn't use any perfume. I made it to the kitchen and froze. The light was on. I had definitely turned it off before going to bed. I hadn't been drinking, and I wasn't sleepwalking. I was sure of it. As I stepped closer to the counter, I saw it, a tiny silver locket resting on the table. I didn't recognize it, but the engraving on it was clear, "For Emily, forever yours." Who's Emily? I whispered to myself. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me, cold breath on my neck. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, but no one was there. I ran to the study, where my grandfather kept the security system. I opened his laptop and quickly logged in. The cameras outside had recorded nothing. No one had entered or left the house. The footage was clear, but it made no sense. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scrolled through the recordings. Just then, a noise echoed through the house, a soft voice, almost a whisper, coming from the hall. "Leave." The voice was chilling, filled with an old sadness. I ran back to the kitchen, the locket still on the table. But now, the perfume was stronger, almost suffocating. As I stood frozen in place, the front door creaked open. I dashed to the window and saw a figure standing in the yard. A woman, her back turned to me, wearing a flowing white dress. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, blending with the night. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things, ran out of the house, and called my mom. She told me not to be ridiculous, but she agreed to come over. She didn't believe me, but I needed someone there. When my mom arrived, I led her straight to the kitchen. She stopped dead in her tracks, her face pale. "Do you smell that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "That perfume. What about it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It smells exactly like Grandma Emily's," she said, looking confused. I stared at her in disbelief. "She died here, in this house, 15 years ago. And you're telling me you're smelling her perfume?" The room seemed to grow colder, the walls pressing in on me. I felt as though I was suffocating. "You're not making any sense," I said, my voice trembling. "Grandma Emily? She was just a memory. She's gone." How could? Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, making the lights flicker. I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable, tapping against the wooden floor. "What was that?" my mom whispered, looking around frantically. "I don't know." "I heard it too," I replied, clutching her arm. "It's not just me, is it?" Before she could answer, we both heard it, voices, low and indistinct, murmuring from somewhere deep within the house. It was as though they were coming from the walls themselves. "Do you hear that?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "I do," my mom said, eyes wide with fear. "I don't understand, what is it?" The voices grew louder, more distinct, and then we heard it clearly, "Emily, come home." My breath caught in my throat. I turned to my mom, my eyes wide with terror. This isn't real, right? This can't be happening." She was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on something beyond me, past the kitchen window, into the yard. I followed her gaze and saw the figure again, the woman, still standing by the gate, staring into the house. "Mom, we need to go now," I pleaded, pulling at her arm. But she didn't respond. She was frozen, her eyes glued to the figure outside. "Mom!" I shook her, and she finally snapped out of her trance. She looked at me, her face ashen. "Emily. She's not gone. She's still here. She's been waiting for you." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "That woman outside," my mom murmured, trembling. "That's Emily. She's been trying to reach us. She's calling you." Before I could process what she said, the door slammed shut behind us, trapping us inside. The house seemed to groan under the pressure of some unseen force, and the perfume grew stronger, overwhelming, suffocating. "Please," I begged, "we need to leave. Right now." But the front door refused to open. No matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. My phone rang suddenly, and I jumped, almost dropping it. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered, my voice shaking. "You should have never stayed there," a raspy voice crackled through the speaker. "Emily isn't the one you should be afraid of. It's what's waiting for her." The line went dead. "What does that mean?" I whispered, fear gripping my chest. Suddenly, a faint laugh echoed from somewhere in the house, a chilling, hollow sound. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for us to unlock it. "We need to go," my mom whispered, backing away from the door. But I couldn't leave, not without answers. The mirrors on the wall began to crack, one by one. I heard the whispers again, this time clearer, like a chant. "Emily, come home, come back to us." I turned to my mom, but she was gone. In her place stood the figure of the woman from outside. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips curled into a twisted smile. The last thing I remember is the whisper again, this time directly in my ear, "You're just like her." Story 9. It was a cold winter evening when I decided to stay on campus during the holiday break. My friends and I had just turned 19, and we were eager to explore the nightlife. We had gotten our hands on some fake IDs, and we were determined to test them out. With excitement, we headed to the nearest bar. The night was young, and the place was alive with flashing lights and pulsing beats. People surrounded us, laughing and dancing as the bass of the music vibrated through the floor. I could feel my heart race with anticipation, both from the thrill and the alcohol slowly taking its effect. I hadn't expected to see him at all. A tall man with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach his gaze approached me at the bar. "His name was Jack," he said. "Hey, what's your name?" "The next round's on me," he said with a casual air, already gesturing to the bartender for 2 shots. I hesitated but accepted. I wasn't going to turn down free drinks. The conversation was nothing special, light-hearted, about school, about the holidays, but something felt off. He seemed to know exactly what to say to keep me engaged, pulling me in with every word. After a while, I needed a break and excused myself to the restroom. The moment I returned, I realized something strange. My friends had disappeared. I looked around, but the crowded bar seemed to have swallowed them whole. Panic started to creep in, but then I saw Jack, still by the bar, leaning against it casually. "Don't worry, you'll be fine," he said, offering me a smile that felt too perfect, too rehearsed. "Let's get out of here. It's a little too crowded for my taste anyway." I didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. But as we stepped outside, the chill of the night air hit me, and I began to feel lightheaded, as if the world was spinning around me. "Where are my friends?" I asked, my words slurring as I tried to focus on Jack, who was leading me down an alley I didn't recognize. "Your friends don't matter," he said, his voice dropping an octave lower. "You're going to stay with me tonight." I tried to pull away, but my body wasn't responding the way it should. Jack's grip was unyielding, and his hand was like iron around my wrist. Something was very wrong. "Wait, where are we going?" I tried to force the words out, my heart pounding. "I don't want to be alone with you." Jack chuckled darkly. "You don't have a choice now, do you? You'll be just fine. Trust me." My mind was spinning as I stumbled after him, trying to catch my bearings. The alley around me grew darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. It was like the world was warping, bending into something unrecognizable. The night air smelled wrong, like rotting leaves and something metallic. Suddenly, I stopped. I couldn't go any further. No, I gasped, trying to break free. Let me go. Please. I don't want this. Jack's grip tightened. You're not in control anymore. You never were. I pulled against him, but my legs felt like jelly. Panic surged through me. The alleyway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in on me. The only sound was the echo of our footsteps, the rhythmic thud of my heart in my ears. Where are we? I whispered, more to myself than to him. Jack stopped walking and turned to face me, his cold eyes glimmering with something darker than I could name. This place? It's nowhere. It doesn't exist. Not in the way you think. I swallowed hard. What are you talking about? You'll find out soon enough. But not yet. Please. I want to go home, I begged, my voice shaky. Home? You think you can go home after this? Jack's laugh was low, almost mocking. No one leaves once they've come this far. You'll stay with me now. Forever. The world around me seemed to warp again, twisting, pulling at my mind. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was giving way. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. Suddenly, I heard something. Footsteps. Rapid, distant. Then a voice, a familiar voice, distant but clear, called out, "Is someone there?" I turned, hoping for any sign of help, but the figure that emerged from the shadows made my heart stop. It was Professor Roberts, my former history teacher. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide with terror, his face gaunt and covered in sweat, as if he had been running for hours. "Allison," he croaked, his voice ragged. What's happening here?" I blinked, confused. "Professor? What's going on? Get away from her!" He shouted, his voice trembling with urgency as he ran towards us. "Jack, you don't know what you're doing. You." Before I could process what was happening, Jack pulled me closer, his grip now like ice around my arm. "You think he can save you?" Jack's voice was a low growl, his eyes narrowing with malice. "He's just as trapped as you are." Professor Roberts lunged forward, but Jack didn't flinch. He looked down at me with a terrifying calm. "You don't know what you've walked into. None of you do." I couldn't move, frozen by fear and confusion. "Please, someone help me!" I screamed, my voice breaking. But Jack just smirked, his lips curling with satisfaction. "Help you? There is no escape. There never was." Then, in a blink, he was gone. He disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as if he had never been there at all. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, my legs shaking beneath me. The professor stood still for a moment, his face pale. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the empty space where Jack had been. When he finally turned to me, there was an unsettling sadness in his eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "This place, this town, it's a trap. It's always been a trap." "What do you mean?" My voice trembled, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Where is everyone? Where are my friends?" The professor sighed, his shoulders heavy with a sorrow I couldn't quite place. "They were never here. No one's here. It's all part of the game. The thing you met, Jack, he's part of something much bigger. And you're next in line." "What do you mean, next in line?" I asked, my voice quivering. "I don't want this. I just want to go home." "Home?" The professor shook his head slowly, a pained expression crossing his face. "You won't be able to go home. Not now. Not ever." Before I could respond, everything around me seemed to shudder. The walls of the alley twisted, the ground buckled beneath my feet, and for a brief moment, everything went black. I woke up hours later in an unfamiliar room, the smell of damp wood filling the air. I tried to sit up, but the world felt heavy, as if I had been in a deep, dark place. Professor Roberts was sitting beside me, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You were almost lost," he said quietly. "But you don't remember what happened, do you?" I shook my head, trying to piece together the fragments of my night, but nothing made sense. "What do you mean?" He looked around, ensuring no one was watching, and then leaned closer. "Jack isn't just some guy from the bar. He's been following people like you, people who can't remember what happens to them. And you just met him. But this was no accident." The room fell silent, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't safe. Not anymore. Not from Jack, or the things he represented. As the professor spoke, I couldn't help but feel that something was lurking in the background, something that would follow me no matter where I went. Jack was only the beginning, and I was just another part of his twisted game. But what was his endgame? And why me? The questions lingered, unanswered. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd ever truly escape from what had just begun. Story 10. New Year's Eve 2024 was supposed to be a peaceful night for me, a much-needed break after a hectic year. My girlfriend, Emily, had invited me to a party, but I was not in the mood to mingle. Exhausted from work and still recovering from a recent business trip, I decided to stay home. The quiet was a comfort, and I could relax with our cat, Luna, who was curled up on the couch. Our home was tucked away on the edge of a small town in Oregon, far from the city lights and noise. The house was old, built on land that had been passed down through generations. It sat in a dense forest, surrounded by tall, looming pines. Snow had been falling for hours, turning the world outside into a serene, cold wasteland. Yet, despite the stillness of the night, something about the silence felt wrong. Around 9:30 p.m., Luna started acting strangely. She stood on the windowsill, her fur bristling, her green eyes fixed on something outside. I tried to calm her down, but she refused to look away, her body rigid as if she was staring at something she couldn't quite understand. "Hey, Luna, what's wrong?" I murmured, but she didn't respond. Her growls were soft, almost imperceptible, but the hair on my neck stood up. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. I walked over to the window, trying to see what had caught her attention. The snow outside had turned into a white blur, and all I could make out were the dark shadows of trees. "Come on, girl," I said softly, but she just hissed and backed away. Something was definitely off. I shrugged it off as paranoia. Perhaps the storm was messing with her senses. I grabbed my phone, sending Emily a quick text, but the message wouldn't send. The signal was weak, then completely lost. I was about to check on the storm when I heard something outside. A faint, dragging sound, slow and deliberate, like someone shuffling through the snow. I stood up, glancing at Luna, who was now fixated on the door, ears alert. I grabbed a flashlight and moved to the front door. Peering through the peephole, all I could see was the swirling snow, dancing in the wind. The faint light from the hallway barely illuminated the darkness outside. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet, that feeling of unease still gnawed at me. I opened the door a crack, shining the flashlight into the snow-covered porch. No footprints. No sign of anyone. Just an empty, white void. I shut the door quickly, locking it behind me, my hands trembling. Luna growled softly at my feet. "I'm just imagining things," I muttered to myself. "It's just the storm." But Luna's eyes were still fixed on the door, her ears back. She wasn't convinced. "I'm going to check the back," I said, more to calm myself than anything else. I moved quickly, but the footsteps outside grew louder, closer, until it felt like they were right on the other side of the wall. They weren't the soft crunch of a person walking through snow. No, these were heavy, deliberate steps. Almost unnatural. I reached the back door and froze. The handle was rattling, gently at first, then more urgently. My heartbeat quickened. No one should be out there. I opened the door a crack, the cold air biting my skin. Hello? I called out into the dark, my voice shaky. Is someone out there? No answer. Just the wind. But the footsteps continued, now circling around the house. I felt like I was being hunted, as if something, or someone, was closing in on me. Suddenly, I heard it again. A scraping sound. Like a knife carving into wood. I hesitated, then stepped outside. Snow crunched under my boots as I shined the flashlight around, the beam shaking in my hand. And then, there it was, etched in the snow, right in front of the door. Leave. The letters were jagged and uneven, as though scratched by something sharp and unnatural. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. What does this mean? Luna hissed again, her fur standing on end. I slammed the door shut and locked it, feeling my pulse racing. No, this isn't right. This isn't just the storm. Something's out there. I tried calling Emily, but my phone showed no service. Panic surged through me. Emily, please pick up. What the hell is going on? My phone remained silent, no signal, no connection. My thoughts scrambled. I dialed again, hoping it was just a glitch. But nothing changed. I couldn't reach her. The storm outside picked up, the wind howling, the sound unnerving. Then the lights flickered, sputtered, and went out. The house was suddenly plunged into darkness. The only light came from the flashlight, which now felt feeble in the overwhelming blackness. I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were at the window. Slow, deliberate. The sound made my skin crawl. Something was moving around the house, just out of sight. I crept toward the kitchen window, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. Peering through the blinds, I saw a shape standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall, far too tall for any normal person. I squinted, but I couldn't make out any details. The figure stood motionless, like a dark shadow blending with the night. Who's there? I called, my voice weak. Show yourself. The figure didn't move. It didn't even acknowledge me. It just stood there, staring at the house. A cold, malevolent presence radiated from it, and I felt my heart drop. I stepped back from the window, feeling a chill deep in my bones. What the hell is that thing? I whispered. Luna growled, louder now, her tail stiff. She darted into the kitchen, and I followed her, my breath shallow. Then, a loud crash sounded from the back of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Luna bolted toward the kitchen door, her claws clicking against the floor. I followed, but as I approached the door, the smell hit me, something foul, like rot. I opened the door slowly, and there it was, the window was shattered, the cold wind rushing in, snow blowing across the floor. Footprints led up to the window, but there were no footprints leading away. I stepped back, heart racing, and that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, too deep to be human. I turned around, flashlight raised, my breath fogging up in the cold. There, in the corner of the kitchen, stood the figure from outside. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly, like pale embers smoldering in the dark. Who are you? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. It didn't respond. It didn't even move. It just stood there, its eyes locked on me. I backed away slowly, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't look away. Finally, I bolted for the door, grabbing Luna and running without thinking. I didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house, my chest heaving as I pounded on their door. "What's going on?" the neighbor asked, her eyes wide with concern. "There's something in my house," I gasped. "It's not human. It's watching me." The neighbor let me in, and soon the police arrived. They searched the area, but found nothing. No broken windows. No strange footprints. No evidence of anyone being there. "It was a break-in gone wrong," the officer said, his voice dismissive. "We'll file a report, but it's probably just some kids playing a prank." But I knew better. I knew what I had seen. The thing in the house wasn't human. It wasn't a prank. I never went back to that house. Emily and I left the next day, but I still can't shake the feeling. Every year, on New Year's Eve, I wonder, was it just a nightmare? Or is something still out there in the woods, waiting? Waiting for someone else to ignore its warning? The wind howls outside, and I can't help but feel like I'm being watched. Every year, the memories come back, and I can't escape the fear that lingers, like the shadow of that thing standing in the dark.